Hello, my name is Jim. This is my podcast, The Bloody Vegans. You're very welcome to it. Each week, I'll be travelling ever deeper into the world of veganism, discovering along the way a multitude of viewpoints from the political and ethical to the practical. I'll be doing this through a series of conversations, each aiming to further illuminate my understanding, and hopefully yours, of all things plant-centric. So it's episode 10, and this week I'll be speaking to Dora Hargitai, who represents Animal Rebellion in this particular episode. Dora's been involved in activism for many years and has been vegan for over 4 years now, and more latterly has been involved in the Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion protests in April and October in central London. She's an incredible person, an inspirational leader, and I hope you enjoy the conversation with her. So without further ado, this is me and Dora Hargitai. Tell me about your journey into veganism in the first place, Dora.
Journey into veganism. It started about 4 years ago, and I lived in Scotland that time. I was working with the oil and gas industry, actually, which is a funny addition to the rest of my story, I think, how it all turned out. And I remember I walked into Aldi, I believe, and wanted to have a vegetable dish that night. And I picked up this booklet. It was a very small book called Vegan. I thought, it sounds like something with vegetables. And I was a vegetarian before, so the word veg, it already, brought some memories up. And so I got that book. I looked into it and it looked super complicated. So I thought, scrap that. Veganism is not for me. It's all about complicated stuff with tofu and soya. So I said, no way. And then somehow that stuck in my mind. So I kept going back to recipes with this name, vegan. And I suppose just from there, I kept finding YouTube videos. I was looking at them. I found all the celebrities from 3-4 years ago. So if you know Freely, the banana girl, for example, and of course all the UK vegan advocates at that time. So talking about plant-based news, for example, or I think even Earthling Ed started around that time. I find all of these folks. I kept watching them, and I just understood the rest of it really quickly, both the environmental aspect as well as the animal rights aspect. And from that point, there was no return. So it took me about 2 months to come to this point. But yeah, it was Scotland 4 years ago.
And a booklet in a supermarket.
And a booklet in a supermarket, exactly, which I have never used for cooking because it was the worst booklet. But even then, it was helpful somehow.
Yeah, and you said you kind of like embraced all of the angles of it kind of at once. It was all sort of coming together. Was there a particular angle that started to stand out for you early on, whether it be the kind of animals, the health, the environment, which bit was kind of jumping out for you?
Yeah, so generally speaking, I don't really like following anyone or anything. So I was really resistant to what people were saying on YouTube in terms of, how true is this? I never made my research. So I thought, I'm just going to give myself time and get thinking. So what really stood out to me was the logic behind why we eat or why we should not eat animals. And as I kept thinking about different aspects, why do we eat animals or beings that we couldn't catch physically? I was asking questions to myself, could I possibly run after a cow if it was not previously bred into a shape and size that, is unable to move anymore? Could I possibly bite through the neck of a chicken? And it all didn't make sense. And that logic just made me question everything else and be open to these, because my own logic led to that conclusion that there is something really off about this idea that we should be eating animals.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I've not actually thought about that before, like that sort of logical argument about what you could catch and so on and hunt, etc. And at what point, so, this was, what you said, 4 years ago? So at what point did your paths kind of cross with maybe Extinction Rebellion and then latterly Animal Rebellion? How did you get involved in that?
Right. So I think, as I said, I was working in the oil and gas industry.
Yeah.
And apparently I've always been, I always considered myself friends of animals, friends of the environment and the planet. And so I always wanted to go in that direction. But I just landed in this industry because at that time, this was an opportunity for me to follow. But it has always been in the back of my mind that I really want to do something with the planet, for the animals. But that time I didn't understand that animals do not only refer to wild animals, they're only also, the farmed animals that I also care about. At that time, I was not aware of that. So anyway, I was living there in Scotland that time, working in this industry. And at one point, it just clicked that I just can't do this anymore. There is no way I can follow. So I decided to study. Further on, I went to America. I did my MBA back there with a focus on sustainability. So I already directed my destiny in that way by further educating myself. And then when I came back to the UK, actually, I started to work as a restaurant manager. I was working in Birmingham, managing a plant-based restaurant, and even then, I was not really aware of all the environmental implications of our lifestyle. I was slowly just going and taking baby steps into understanding how it's all interlinked, veganism as well as all the environmental aspects. What really made the change was when I first joined Extinction Rebellion as a volunteer. I joined the April Rebellion in April this year, but I went there with a vegan top. It was an activist top. I had my megaphone with me with all the vegan stickers. I was ready to do my regular vegan chants. I was basically going there, to be honest, to somewhat disrupt or lead many of the conversations, because I was assuming that Extinction Rebellion will be nothing about animals or, the connection between animals and the environment. And I was massively mistaken. This has really been the start for me with Extinction Rebellion, and I might tell the story later of how it unfolded to the next steps.
Yeah. Well, so you went with the assumption that there wouldn't be a connection. That's kind of interesting. I don't know. I would have felt like maybe there would have been like sort of with the link with veganism and sort of the environment and so on. And I was kind of probably like surprised when I saw elements of Extinction Rebellion that weren't vegan, or that almost took me by surprise then, because it felt counterintuitive. So was that kind of almost the birth of Animal Rebellion? Like, where did it kind of come from?
Yeah. So as I said, I really expected to see nothing that reflects a vegan philosophy, but I was very positively surprised, and also I found a lot more than I was looking for. So, for example, what really surprised me is that all food in the main location of the rebellion, which was Marble Arch in April, all food was vegan, basically, except donation food, which was hugely surprising. Previously, and I think the reason why I assumed it's not going to be as vegan friendly, because in previous environmental activism, I met a lot of people who deeply cared about stopping fracking, for example, or stop deforestation, or any type of environmentally degrading activity. But they were not vegans, and they never really understood when I talked about veganism. But again, it was a massive surprise what I found there. And also what I found as well is Extinction Rebellion introduced this idea to me that it's possible to talk to people who have different ideas without hatred and without unfruitful conflicts. And I realized that there is actually a way that people can communicate to each other, and without trying to convince each other, just convey message, and therefore give that information without having a personal attacking scenario. And that was a big step for me, I think, as a vegan activist as well, to realize it's possible to conversate in that way. So I had a lot of very good discussions. And because of this culture of Extinction Rebellion, a lot of people actually listened and wanted to know why veganism is good, why not eating animals is a better choice. It's because we all united in Extinction Rebellion, and still do, under the same understanding that we commonly face this one threat. And so to answer your questions, what was the birth of Animal Rebellion and how it all started? For me, it really came from this moment when I realized that I am here with friends, and these people are unknown people to me. And if I could find 1,000 friends in one location just that day without knowing them, then why is not everybody my friend in this whole world? We could talk to everybody this way if only we knew how to talk to each other. And it's really a matter of changing the public discourse, changing the way we relate to each other.
Yeah, that's a really like admirable concept. Like it's really like I definitely fully behind that, fully support that idea that we perhaps need to have less division, less divisiveness, and more kind of like coming together. On that kind of note, because like the public perception of Extinction Rebellion, and I think it's kind of in certain portions of the media, I'm not suggesting across the board, but I've had conversations, for example, recently. I had a conversation with somebody about Animal Rebellion, and they were talking about, kind of generally like we're behind them, we're positive about what they're doing, except when they're like stopping people getting on the tube or something. It was that was the point they were making, and I was kind of like, we had a discussion about it. We were talking about like, you know, that seems like a very short term kind of like viewpoint, even if that was kind of happening, you know, if somebody was being stopped from getting to work or whatever, like there wouldn't, you know, arguably what Extinction Rebellion, Animal Rebellion want is that there is a place for you to go to work, you know, in sort of 10, 11, 12 years time, however long we've got left. So it felt like, yeah, I get it. You know, that may be frustrating on the day, but there's definitely this like seed of maybe frustration almost in certain pockets of the community, that it feels like what's going on with Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion is extreme, or it's, you know, we get their point, but this isn't the way to get the message across. Like, how would you kind of respond to that?
Absolutely, it is massively disruptive. If you were brought up in the society, you were told this story that if only you go to school, you do the right thing, you behave normal, you fit into this society, you will be fine. And you have done everything, probably as a child and as a young adult and also as an adult, to fit into this system. And then you realize that you can succeed, and then you maybe build a family, you got a car, you got a house, and then someone comes and tells you that everything was a lie, it's not how we are supposed to live. It's massively disruptive. And then these people come up with, I can also understand how people see Extinction Rebellion showing these performances in the Red Rebels, for example, wearing these big red dresses flowing through central London, big boats, very weird stuff for an average person. I can very much imagine that this is shocking and disruptive. But to echo what you just said, the reason why Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion will engage in such activity is not because we really want to or really like it. It is because we realize that even though we have tried everything, nothing has really worked. And so what you do then is we look back at history and we try to take good examples from what has worked in the past. What we can see is whenever society tried to make systemic change, which is something that we are trying to achieve, the only way that we managed to achieve it was through non-violent civil disobedience. And this is what Animal Rebellion and Extinction Rebellion both rely on and agree on, which means that we are disrupting the status quo ultimately, which will mean that people see day-to-day difficulties if they live in locations where the disruption happens.
Yeah, and like just describe for people who perhaps don't know what's the kind of ultimate aims, if you like, of kind of Animal Rebellion and Extinction Rebellion, where they cross over.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I have to do justice to the previous question as well on how Animal Rebellion started. The listeners probably know, if not, I will just explain the three main demands of Extinction Rebellion. The first one is we demand the government to tell the truth about climate change. Animal Rebellion says that we agree to this and we demand the same, but we also demand the government to tell the truth about animal agriculture, which is currently not being said, and the government doesn't act as if there was an emergency induced by animal agriculture. The second thing, Extinction Rebellion asks for the government to act on that truth, which means they demand the government to reach a net zero carbon emissions by 2025. Animal Rebellion also agrees to this, and we also say that it's impossible to reach this target, unfortunately, unless we end animal agriculture and industrial fishing, I should say fishing altogether. And then the third demand is Extinction Rebellion ask for a citizens' assembly, which does Animal Rebellion as well. And we also add that we realize that we need to have the voice to represent animal agriculture as the problem and fishing as well in that discussion.
Yeah, and so if that's the kind of aim, like, can we talk a little bit about what they, you mentioned at the top there, like, tell the truth. What does the truth kind of look like?
Brilliant question. I think the reason why number one demand was phrased this way, it's quite vague, isn't it? As you just mentioned, what does it really mean? Is because without telling the ultimate truth, which is we are on a dying planet, no action can be taken and no steps can be taken towards this. Something that happens when you tell the truth to people is that no matter how shocking it is, they get a chance to respond to it accurately. And what that response is going to look like can come from the people themselves. But as long as you don't tell the truth, you can't expect people to guess or figure it out. And so government has been acting for the past 30 years as if there was no climate emergency. They acted in a way that they sort of agree that, nature has been protected and we have to sort of live with nature, but not in a way that proved that they really understand that there is an emergent situation. And so what they did was just not enough. And now that I think there is enough scientific evidence out there, which really triggered Extinction Rebellion as well, this truth-telling actually enables people and all fields of society to then act on this.
And the acting part, like what would that kind of entail at like a governmental kind of level, like large institution kind of level?
Right. So what we say is this issue is caused by everybody, and this is a historical issue as well. We didn't make this problem today. Human activity led to this point through the past thousands of years, and probably even before, how we built up our societies and how we built up our systems and economies and so forth. So changing is going to be extremely difficult, and we don't really know how it's going to happen. There are a lot of theories of how that change should look like. Is it about questioning capitalism? Is it completely demolishing capitalism? Is it the alternate version? Is it something else? Does it mean we are going to live more locally and not globally? There are a lot of theories of what that's going to look like, which will define obviously how the government acts. But what we say is the government does not have to take these decisions on their own, because they are not the ones causing the trouble only. So they're not only responsible for making decisions, however, they are responsible for including the public in the discussion. And so this is where we connect to demand 3, which is the Citizens' Assembly, because we want the government to be led by those discussions in the assemblies and co-work together how the system is going to look like, which means we want everybody from the field of science, from education, from agriculture, all fields to join that discussion with the government and make decisions.
Given that kind of, people, we want to kind of get people together in this kind of like citizens' assembly, if you like. It feels like there's a sort of a crystallized moment, like we're right on the verge of an election, right? So it feels like this like crystallized moment for people to kind of make some sort, and I'm not asking you to select for people who they should vote for, but there does feel like a moment in time where we can influence through the current system, to for whatever power to take action. And that sort of leads me to a bit of a quandary, because I kind of think, I'm kind of concerned, I guess, that with all of the amazing work that Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion did most recently, particularly back in October, I'm almost kind of concerned that that's not on the front pages right now of the agendas. Like, how do you kind of feel about that, like, as we run into this kind of election period?
It's extremely scary, as you said, extremely scary, because whatever the decision is today, or not today, but in a few days, that is going to define the next years, and also it's going to define the whole planet. The UK is in an extremely, influential position. So it's not a it's not a matter of, whatever happens. It's extremely key. And I was at my local hustings last night, and interestingly, one of the candidates, I will not say which political party, but one of the candidates is actually a fellow rebel of mine. And she is also amazing as a politician. But apparently, she was there in both the big uprisings in April and in October as well, as well as she got arrested. So she has first-hand experience on what it means to be a rebel, what it means to sacrifice something, and she was there as a candidate. And I can safely say she got the most of the positive response, even though the people who were listening to her were not rebels at all. They were just citizens of that town. But I think there is this change in humanity right now, coming from despair and feeling extremely lost and scared, to somehow seeing the solutions in people who have the right mindset about how the change should look like. And it is not through money, it's not through economic growth, it's not through a winning and losing kind of narrative. It's something else that Extinction Rebellion brought in big time. So as much as I agree to you that, we don't see it enough right now, and this should absolutely be on the front page, I see these little rays of hope. And I see that there are actually Extinction Rebels who are either corporate leaders or politicians, or maybe they work as head of hospital, who actually know what's going on and they are ready to make sacrifices. They just need an outlet and a connection how to shift that around. So I think there is that. If it's fast enough or not, I'm not sure about it.
Yeah, I suppose, especially when we look like across the pond over to the States, and we look to South America, like I'm thinking Brazil, so on. That really does concern me, that these the kind of people who almost have, well, not almost, they do have the opposing agendas. Seem to be taking control of these large land masses, and in some cases taking control of areas that control the Amazon, the lungs of our planet, sort of thing. So yeah, I'm deeply concerned about it, and I do hope you're right that there are some rays of hope.
Yes. You just mentioned the Amazon. It's so relevant to me right now because we had a disruption, actually. Not disruption, I would say an event rather, co-joined with Extinction Rebellion a few weeks ago, Animal Rebellion and Extinction Rebellion. We went to see BlackRock, who is a major investor in one of the largest meat companies in the world. And it's interesting because, as I mentioned before, I see this hope, but also this notion of everybody stuck in the system. Apparently, the CEO of BlackRock, of that company, has released an open letter maybe a year ago, I think in 2018. And in that report, he actually calls the world of business to be more sustainable and to look into the real values and not only into profits. So it's really interesting because I do see that people in power, actually, they are just people, just like you and me. And this is what my hope is, that just as much as this message reaches you and me and anyone whom we probably know that they care already, it does reach these people just as much. They have families as well. They have might have children, and I see Extinction Rebellion doing some really amazing stuff with these corporate leaders. I can't share a lot about this, but it really gives me hope that eventually it's possible to change around. Now, how to change it around, that is the question. And this is a larger picture of systemic change, which I think is arguably the most important thing for us to focus right now as a movement and as humans as well. And how do we change?
Do you, with that, I'm thinking of we're talking about corporate leaders kind of making positive changes. And I'm thinking about I've probably noticed over certainly the last kind of 2.5, almost 3 years that I've been vegan, that even in that short period of time, there appears to have been a movement towards monetizing veganism. I'm talking things like companies that it might be as simple as an ice cream company, who switch to we better sell a plant-based version, and then they'll sell a couple, and restaurants having a vegan menu, and you're seeing it almost being monetized across the piece. The supermarket sections getting bigger and bigger. Now, I'd love to think that was because they've all got altruistic aims and so on, and they want to save the planet, but it's because it's making money, right? So I kind of feel like I'd love to get your take on how you see that monetization as a good thing or is that kind of a concern to you? Like, how do you feel about it?
Yeah. So we agree that we live in a capitalist system, right? And in this system, the way businesses thrive and survive is by generating profits. And the way how countries and nations thrive and grow is by producing economic growth, and that is through an increasing GDP. Now, the problem is that we realize that we keep growing, we keep producing, distributing, and consuming on a finite planet. And I think this is where we hit the wall and say, it's all great. And if there was an infinite planet and we could have infinite resources, infinite metal and air and water and so forth, it wouldn't be a problem, and we would only have to focus on animal rights, and we could do it forever. But the thing is, we are reaching this, and so to save everybody on this planet, we really have to question this entire system we live in, and how we define the value of human life, how do we define the value of everything. And so this is why the discussion becomes so incredibly complex, because we don't just ask people and companies anymore to go vegan, to have more vegan options. We also actually challenge everybody on this planet to question how we live together, as well as mainly the government and the industrial leaders on how we keep moving forward. And I think what becomes very apparent for everybody is that this growth will not be able to continue, or if it keeps continuing, it will only continue in the Western world, and the gap between the Western world and we can say global North and South is just going to increase until it all collapses together. And this is the collapse that I think scares a lot of people. So again, just to answer your question, I do think that it's amazing that all these brands are selling, vegan ice creams, and there is more vegan option, and you can do vegan travels and so forth. However, if we look into what is going to secure life on this planet, not just for humans, but all the animals, really, we're talking about billions of species. Unfortunately, we can safely say that by selling vegan options is not the way we will save this planet.
Do you think it has the power then to kind of almost, the selling of these options, etc., to almost act as a distraction? Just as you were talking there, it kind of occurred to me, like, is this potentially like almost a distraction to us in the vegan community, that kind of like, oh, it's all like going our way, we don't need to worry kind of thing? Like, I can see it almost as being a bit of a but like just getting in the way of our kind of activism, if you like, that we think, oh, it's okay because everything's switching to veganism now. There's even going to be a vegan like cooking show on BBC One, so it's all going to be great.
Yeah. We would all like to believe, I think, that we have to do nothing else but somehow turn the world vegan and it's all going to be fine. And also we can keep our level of comfort, and the world is just going to arrange around us, and we are going to be able to keep up this level of lifestyle. And because we are already vegans, we can sort of afford to fly and drive because we're already doing our bit. And this is an amazing message. I used to love this message. I used to believe in this, but unfortunately I figured out that it's a lot worse, and we are looking at major, not only environmental catastrophes, but also a social collapse in the very upcoming few years, very near future. And so that's what really puts this question into perspective for me, and I think a lot of people who engage with the rebellion.
I feel much the same actually, particularly as you lay it out like that, like the level of social change that we, I think about, like, take this election right now, like the talk about kind of like immigration is a hot topic, and you've got the kind of right-hand side of politics kind of, and people kind of viewing it as like all immigration's a bad thing and so on and so forth. And then the left's kind of like, let's open the doors and be much more kind of open. And I'll probably, personal disclosure, probably sit much more on the left. But like almost, whichever way you sit on that curve, like think about immigration, like immigration in 10 years' time, if we don't begin to really, tackle climate change, the immigration issue is going to be a completely different conversation, because the numbers, right? I think I'm right in that assumption. You'll know much better than me, right?
Absolutely. There is this flood map. You can Google and find it on the internet, and you can see the road map. And there's a little thing you can move on the bottom of the screen to see how sea levels rise, and it really makes it very, very clear that major ports and cities are going to be underwater in the very near future. And we're not talking about, next century. It could be in our lifetime, or if not, it's going to be in our children's lifetime. And this is just sea level rise. We're looking at a bunch of other natural disasters that can or will actually happen to us. But that is one that is, I think, a good start for people, because it's so visual when they see, oh, London is going to be underwater. How many years? And you just keep, moving it and adjusting. Like, oh, this is when I'm supposed to go to, maybe retire. This is when I'm supposed to go to school, and then it just puts things into perspective.
Yeah. Do you feel confident that message is kind of in the public consciousness? Because I think most people now are aware of climate change. Like if you ask the average person on the street, I think they'd say, yeah, I know about climate change. And yeah, I saw those guys like protesting and so on and so forth. And then they might watch, I don't know, like you take like David Attenborough recently, and he paints, a stark picture in certain elements. And I feel like almost the net result of that in the public consciousness was like, well, let's not use plastic straws. Like, I just feel like, do you feel like it's in the truth about, to that extent, is in the public sphere?
Definitely not. That if it was in the public knowledge to that extent, we would already be somewhere else. So definitely not. However, I have to credit a lot of the online news magazines like The Independent, The Guardian. Now, mainly every single day, there is a major article about the environment, and it's no longer like, oh, there might be an issue, or there is a hole in the ozone layer. These are very comprehensive and well-written articles about what's really happening, and they are also really brave. They no longer BS about the subject. They are really, really clear on what's happening in how many years and so forth. So I think that is definitely helpful in that respect of creating that awareness and creating that emergence in the truth that we talked about at the beginning. How people act on it, it's a really, really difficult subject, because the way I always imagine our entire human population on the planet, I'm thinking of 7.5 billion. How many people we have right now? Around that, right? Yeah. 7.5 billion people waking up in the morning, going to work, and they're going to do something for probably 8 hours or more if you live in a third world country, unfortunately. So you're going to go to work and do something. Now, what do you do in these 8 hours? That is what drives climate change. And also after that, obviously, if you sit in the car and, you drive home, that as well. So maybe I could say, for the 12 hours or 16 hours you're awake, what do you do? But currently, the society and this world we live in gives you a model of what you can live. And, there's no really an alternate. You can't really live in the forest right now. It's not really something that is, I don't say we should live in forests. But what I'm saying is there is one path for everybody to follow, mainly because of these economies of growth that we live in, and also because of media portraying this planet as if it's infinite, and we can have infinite personal wealth and personal growth in that aspect. So yeah, where was I going with that?
Yes, we were talking about kind of the personal kind of action,
right.
And that you, when you spend kind of 8 hours a day doing something, you're contributing to climate change potentially,
right,
because of the system.
Exactly. So even if we start pointing out small individual actions, as you mentioned, the plastic straws. It's amazing, if someone makes that choice. Yeah. Even if someone goes vegan, it's massive. We know how bad it is for the environment. So it's absolutely a massive choice. But still, this is something that you changed maybe 1 hour of your day. You still have 15 hours left. What do you do? And what do you wear? And this is not... these questions are not to attack people or to question their intentions. This is a question for every single one of us. It's a question for me, for you, for politicians, even for environmental activists. It's really a question for everybody. What do I do every single step of my day? And as much as I would like to live in a world where we don't have to think about this, we have just reached to that point, and it's really difficult to comprehend that we live in that time of human history where we have to question every single step we take.
That can, I've had conversations with people just about kind of, when I started to talk about, potentially the scale of climate change and so on, and personal actions, and I might talk to them about going vegan, and that will have a positive impact. And sometimes what people will say to me is like, but it just feels overwhelming. It's just too big for me to solve. And it sounds to some extent like, Extinction Rebellion, Animal Rebellion's kind of aims to almost speak to that. They say this is too big for anybody to solve. Let's get into a conversation. But there's a fear potentially, I suppose, or a danger that people could switch off from that because they feel like, well, if it is too big for me to solve, then those guys over there protesting will do it for us, right? And I have to just stay in my lane almost. What would you kind of say to those people who may feel a bit kind of overwhelmed with it all?
Yeah, we are all in this together, really, and it's really, really amazing when you first enter Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion mainly during the uprising when everybody is there on the streets, and we have these sharing circles and we sit down and we talk about what concerns us. And really, I think what is extremely difficult for people is that they have to sit with this knowledge at home alone or maybe with their families. And as you said, what the rebellion does is it opens the conversation between people, and we realize that we can't solve this alone and we are in it together. So we invite people. And so I would say to anyone who feels like this is just overwhelming, it's way too much, is that you're not alone, and we need your help as well, because you might hold an extremely key information for the future that we just don't know. We all have some piece of information. This is no longer a world, I think, where we will follow heroes who save the planet. I think this is a overarching theme in human history. If you look at biblical stories, or you look at any children's book that says someone will come and save us, and all we need to do is pay for our sins and then try our best. But this is not what's happening. I don't think, and we know that there is not going to be one person to save us, because it's going to be a collaborative effort. So really, there's no one to wait for. But I would also say that as really scary as it sounds to start to get involved with the movement and be an activist, Extinction Rebellion is not, and Animal Rebellion is not a hippie movement when you have to sit on the street for those 2 weeks and cause trouble and stop people to go to work. You can actually work for the rebellion full time as a job, and you can take roles that are extremely interesting and also intellectually challenging. You can be on strategy team, you can be on political strategy, you can actually meet companies, you can work with corporations, you can work with the government, you can actually have extremely powerful and interesting discussions with people, and that is something that you might not be able to have access through your job. And maybe this is what you wanted to do. Maybe you always wanted to have impactful, meaningful work life and conversations. Obviously, what I think people would miss is, what is the salary, what's the compensation? And here is where it becomes interesting. How much can you benefit of this situation? Then this is maybe another discussion.
Yeah. I can imagine that is the challenge. Like, I mean, how do you go about in our current system monetizing these passion projects that we all have, where we want to make a positive impact on the planet? Because I suppose ultimately our system is set up right now that there are very few paying jobs, if you like, that will sustain that. The masses can't work in those industries because they don't exist yet, I guess. Yeah,
and here is where I think we really, really need the support from the government, is saying that the way we value our life right now is extremely flawed, because we would pay, let's say, I don't know what I should bring up, maybe £5 for this cup I'm holding right now, but I would pay nothing for trees to provide shade to me. Just by their existence, it has no value. I don't pay money to trees, obviously, and I see a waterfall, I love it, but I don't pay the waterfall to exist. However, all these little things and natural systems as well, the Gulf Stream, for example, or the ice caps, they are vital parts of our life. So the way we assign monetary value to things is completely flawed. It's built up on the idea that everything man-made has a value and everything not man-made doesn't really have a monetary value. And so if we can, government with economists can turn this around and shift this around, then it means people who protect nature, for example, let's say wildlife activists who act on the ground, or indigenous people, they could actually have support to do that job. And people who don't actually contribute to that would not have as much support. And I think we can all agree that no one wants to put people out of their jobs. I don't want to see people fail and collapse and lose their income. But I also don't want to see this planet dying. So here's the question, what do we do? And I think this is where working with the government and economists to understand this problem would be the way forward.
Did you, I want to just get into the kind of like October Rebellion. And I think it was an amazing piece of kind of activism, got a huge amount of press coverage. And I'm thinking specifically of the Smithfield market and the Billingsgate market kind of blockades, if you like. How did that kind of like, how did the message come across with those people within, you talk about people with livelihoods and so on, those people who've been brought up in this system and kind of have monetized animal agriculture and so on, and that's their living, right? So you guys being there could have potentially felt like an affront to their work. Like you want to take away my livelihood. How did it play out? How did that come across?
Absolutely. This was a major discussion before we went to Smithfield Market, because we knew that this was going to come up, because we occupied the middle of the market. It means people couldn't go to work the next day. We also knew that we are going to have a lot of people who work there, probably coming up, interested or, coming to work, seeing what we do. So we prepared for the discussions, and we made it, first of all, very, very clear that our goal here is not economical disruption to them. This is a symbolic market, and we turned it into a plant-based food market, and that was our aim. One thing we did to ensure that this is very, very clear is some of the Animal Rebellion guys went over I think a few days before, and actually talked to a lot of those workers to also hear what they think. You can never assume what people think. And a lot of them were actually really curious, as I heard from the feedbacks, and really wanted to figure out what it is about. And we had an amazing one day, and thank you for bringing this up. I think Smithfield Market was probably the most beautiful day of my animal activist life. It was just incredibly beautiful. And I have to give massive kudos to everybody who joined. We had about 500 people, and everybody stayed as peaceful as we wanted, and we planned for this to happen. Without their understanding and contribution and collaboration, it couldn't have happened the way it did. If there was a single loud argument between butchers and animal rebel guys, the media would have picked it up immediately, and that would have been in the front news. Trust me, we would be nowhere today. But because people stayed so focused on our goal, and they stayed so centered and also so loving with each other, we were really holding that space with a lot of emotions, and we were really grieving as well for the animals who died there for the past so many years. That really had a uplifted and very, very elevated momentum to it, which obviously the media loved, because they haven't seen animal activism as such before. And here I'm not trying to diminish the importance of other activism. I think I want to highlight this, that every animal activism is needed. And what Animal Rebellion does is just an addition. It's not to replace other activism forms. But what I think I would like to just bring to the front here is that this method does work with regards to the environment, and staying peaceful when we talk about the environment is how we can address this successfully, because we want everybody to turn on this side by understanding how it connects to the environment. And so also, once we left Smithfield Market, we actually had follow-ups from a few of the butchers. They were actually complimenting how well we executed that that day. We did a vigil, we did songs. It was really festive, but not in a crazy festive way. It was just an amazing ambience there. And as I said, they came and asked, who are you guys? How can I learn more about you? So that was...
Yeah, when like I can imagine. Like I wasn't able to be there, and I kind of feel awful for not being there. And I think talking of that, I suppose that's a real kind of I guess a quandary in my mind sometimes. I've explored this a little bit through some of the previous episodes about what the idea of activism kind of is, and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on that, because there's a nagging part of me like that is like the only form of activism that feels super valid, if you like, is what you guys were doing. Like I kind of hold it up at high regard, and I'd kind of love to get your view on kind of activism as a whole. Like, what is it to you?
That's a good question. I think I have personally done a lot of activism forms. So I started with leafleting, through vigils, Cube of Truth, Earthling Experience, slaughterhouse visits, Save, and so forth. And I think I can safely say that I can see how they all fit together, and I can resonate with all of them. And I think it also depends on what kind of person you are. Some people just naturally feel very strongly for what happens, and they feel naturally strongly for the animals, and so they want to be there. They want to do the vigils, and really help people understand how much they suffer. And so I have huge respect for those people. It's not easy at all. So it would be very difficult for me to say, what is the right way or what is a better way. I think, as I said before, I respect all kind of activism forms. The reason why I do support or invest a lot of my time to Animal Rebellion is not because it is a better activism as I see it. It's not because I think others are not good. It is because we need a massive systemic change. And that is only possible if we are able to get the public on our side. And what we need to do here is to open our arms and say, no matter where you come from, I want you to come to my table and talk to us, because we have a message that is important to share. And so, I don't think we are taking an apologetic approach. We are very clear that we are an anti-speciesist movement. So we are not going to, say, oh, it's okay if you eat little meat. We are not commenting as such. We realize that piece of meat is a dead animal who wanted to live. So we have the anti-speciesist approach. What we say, however, is this is environmental and social collapse is what we share together. And I want a piece of your information, and here is what I can offer to you. And let's sort this out together. This is our approach.
Yeah, that kind of makes huge sense. Like, yeah, I think I'm with you on that kind of idea of like activism being kind of multiple things for different people, and definitely that, particularly kind of with you on the idea of getting around the table, I think is so important. Have you, across those different kind of paths of activism and within Animal Rebellion, Extinction Rebellion, seen kind of any disruptive kind of like conflict within inside the group, disagreement of how to go about things?
All the time. Absolutely. And so neither Extinction Rebellion nor Animal Rebellion is a group of perfect people. And and I think we say it all the time, we always learn as we go. It is our aim to learn as well, and not just teach each other, but also learn from each other. And we constantly look at literature as well. And we welcome people in who can bring in information about how to talk to each other. This is something that we just don't really learn as children, right? I never learned it, if I can talk for myself. So we have to also learn. It's also a major cultural shift for entire humanity. It's not just within Extinction Rebellion and Rebellion. It's the way we talk to each other on this planet. Just going back to the elections, I heard this yesterday. It's like, if we win, if you win. It's like, no one wins and no one loses. We all win or we all lose together. This is the situation right now. And so we don't want to win with animal rebellion, and because it assumes that someone is going to lose. We all want to win for every person and every animal on this planet.
That makes sense, and I think if only kind of everybody felt like that, I think we'd be there. And that I guess that's the bit that concerns me somewhat, is that there is still such a divisiveness that almost, if we talk about things being monetized, divisiveness feels like it's been monetized as well. You know, if you think about kind of the social media platforms that are out there, and the kind of idea of clickbait and so on and so forth, and you know, even within the vegan community, we'll use some of the same methodology to our own benefit. But there's lots of vegan activists out there, for example, who kind of and I don't know. I'd love to hear how you feel about this. I sometimes feel uncomfortable with that kind of vegan activism that invites conflict for clickbait, almost like the kind of like. It's often on the street, kind of the you know, mic style interviews that feel kind of aggressively challenging in tone, and I'd love to get your view on it, because whilst I agree with a lot of the sentiment, I sometimes feel like, is this going to help people come on this journey, or is it just going to paint us in a certain light? You know, us as, even that term, us as vegans in this light. Well, I'd love to get your view on it.
So yeah, I used to love those clickbait titles. I used to feed on them and watch them religiously. I was, how is this person exposed? What did we find out about that person? And then those street interviews, like titles like vegan lecturing animal or like an environmental activist on the street, and you know, it's like, let me see how he's going to you know, just burn him. And I used to love that, and I think it is through this transition that really I went through with Extinction Rebellion and Rebellion, is that I just naturally stopped being drawn to these kind of messages. I don't think I ever judged it like, it's horrible, or this is not a good way of activism. I think I also lost a little bit of this judgmentalness. I think I see that, you know, I'm on a personal path. I have no idea where it takes me. And maybe if I look back to where I am today, I would say, I was so judgmental still, or I was in a completely bad mindset. I just see that as far as I go with understanding how we are all trapped in this narrative of who we are and what we do, and in also the vocabulary we have. We, like we said before, this us and them narrative and this we win, you lose. These are things we just pick up on the way as we live. And as we question also how we express ourselves, then it also brings this different sense of togetherness, even through our differences and also through our faults, character faults. So, I don't watch any more titles that are that invite for watching. I think I'm quite critical anyway. But yeah, I don't really engage with this content, but I also think it also comes from the knowledge that there is so much to do, that every single second we have on this planet should be invested into the doors that are already open. And, you know, just take that. If there is someone who is interested to talk to you, just talk to them. If someone, is open to conversate, if someone has an idea to share with you, just go in that direction and try to pull in as much information as possible. And it's almost as every single second that we lose on criticizing other forest activisms, or you know, saying, you should do it differently, or saying, is this too aggressive? We lose that moment, we lose that minute or hour to invest into our future right now when it is still time. And I think this all comes from that just big deadline of, you know, science says it's now 11 years. I think it's much less that we have until we reach this point of no return. Because when we reach that point of no return, then you can, you spend all your time like criticizing others, because there's nothing else to do because the planet is dying. So, but now we still have time to stop this. And so this is where I think this humility comes, to me at least, and says, tells me just focus on what's further and try to see that way.
Yeah. That's certainly got me thinking. How do so somebody's hopefully listening to this thinking, I want to get involved. Like I want I want to support that kind of that idea of every second we've got from now till whatever that deadline is needs to be proactively spent. How would somebody go about doing that? How do you think, the average person could get involved to that extent?
Yeah, there's so many ways, and obviously it starts with the single personal choices. I think everybody can start looking into what does zero waste mean, what does minimalism mean, what does veganism mean if they're not vegan already. This is I think square one is where we can start from. And then you start to realize, there is a bigger picture. I also have a workspace. So how does my work align with all this, climate change and emergency and my personal goals? And you sort of try to sort this out and find the best option. And then you go further out and you see, there is this whole country who is going in one direction. So how can I affect that? You see, there is the whole world. And this is where, for me at least, the answer comes, the only single best way we can influence that is through these movements that we created, Extinction, Rebellion, and it can be anyone else tomorrow coming up. I'm not particularly attached to the name of the rebellion. It can be something else tomorrow. I don't mind as long as this is going to help us, because we can see that, as I was talking about this before, we're all stuck in all levels. So whether you're an individual, you are a company leader or a government official, we are all stuck in the same thing, and we just play by the rules all the time. And we need to push this out of this status quo, which is a wrong balance right now, because this is heading us into extinction. And the single best way that I can imagine right now is through these movements. And as I said before, it's really intellectual. There is a lot of intellectual preparation behind these movements, which is extremely interesting and can be extremely interesting for a professional. No matter what your profession is, it's all needed, because we have to prepare that world that we are going to. I say this often, that we ask the government to change, but what exactly do we expect them to do? They are people, and they will make the changes they want unless we give them an alternate. Where do we want to be? But we have to create that vision, how future is going to look like. And this is something that I think we who agree that there's something has to be done can start working on. And this is why I would invite people to join the rebellion and join this intellectual conversation of how the future is going to look like.
Amazing. So how optimistic are you ultimately about how we kind of, as humanity, I know it's a big question, but how successful we will be in tackling this challenge? Do you feel positive about that?
Yeah, I think I'm extremely realistic and optimistic at the same time.
Sure.
I do believe that it is possible. Miracle is possible. It's until you are in the last day of your life, you sort of believe you live forever, isn't it? Even though you know you will not. It's not a thing, you're still alive. So you can't really comprehend to not being here. And so I also think this way about this crisis situation is, I think it's also human nature, and also it's an animal nature, is to not give up and not accept that this is going to happen. Let's go back to the lion and zebra situation. It is often brought up as, an argument against veganism, but I will use it in a different context now. The zebra is not going to give up. It's going to keep running, even when the lion sort of half ate the animal. The animal still will fight, and oftentimes, or sometimes, I should say, they can actually get away and then recover. It's only done when it's done, and then that's how I feel about this.
I love that. I love that. That's amazing. So my final kind of question, I suppose, is if someone's super keen, they want to get involved, where do they find out about what their kind of next step on getting proactively kind of involved in either Animal Rebellion or Extinction Rebellion? Yeah. Where do they find out that info? Yeah,
I would absolutely recommend everybody to check out the website. I know it's it's the most boring thing, but I think these websites are extremely informative, and they really give a good picture on what's happening. Next, I would also recommend to come to an event. There are a lot of events, and you can sort of get a grasp of what this is. And if you're interested in a specific subject, then there's a volunteer form that you can fill out, and you will be reached out by the relevant group. The volunteer form is also a list of activities that you can do. So it will ask for all your interests and, what is the area that you have been involved in or you are interested to get involved in. And you will be contacted by the relevant teams and, brought in. I have no worry that whatever anyone wants to do, there will be a place for it. And also, anyone can create their own space within the rebellion. It's not a corporation, it is a movement. So it means if you think that maybe there should be a new rebel radio, I think there is one, but maybe there should be one. You're free to approach Extinction Rebellion and say that. I just give an example, but really anything is possible because every single skill is needed for the movement because the movement is us, essentially.
Thank you so much, Dora, for your time today. It's been great chatting to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.